Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Ian Bremmer, founder and president of Eurasia Group. Ian, good to see you.
Good to see you. Hi.
Um, International man of mystery, always on the go. So I take it that's a hotel room. But let's start with the GOP debate, and because I'm really curious, we heard something about foreign policy the last time. What questions would you be asking of the candidates right now that you think are important to know?
I don't know. And some of them I'd probably say, what position would you like in a Trump administration?
Oh, because
Since,
it's a moot point to have the debate at
since
all?
well, and also because a number of them, that's why they're running, right? I mean, certainly Tim Scott, certainly Nikki Haley, certainly Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, these are not people. They know that they're not going to get the nomination, but they're not attacking Trump. They are aligned with him. And given that Trump is, a layup at this point, if not a slam dunk, what do they want to do? What kind of role? How would they change? A second Trump administration from a first Trump administration. I mean, if that's what we are actually looking forward to, let's actually talk about what is happening. But I do think that the foreign
Well, no.
policy
Let's
piece
let's
is pretty good.
let's pause there. I want to pause there a second because actually, one of the strongest contenders, arguably, to have that Secretary of State role, then could be Nikki Haley. Is that right? So should we be speaking to her as if she's in that power position?
If she wants it, I think that she gets to be. I don't know that she'd be vice president, which is what she really wants. But certainly on the Trump cabinet, I think there's no question in my mind. Keep in mind, Mike Pompeo is still out there, and he has been very supportive of Trump, and he's not running against him. He
Yeah.
is still very politically relevant, and he's not going to be VP, but I think that he could also have a cabinet role again if he wants one. Whether he wants to come back at state or not, I think is anybody's guess.
Now, I know Trump is leading in the polls, and quite markedly so. I think it was 59% last I checked. But if the sort of it fell away and we're down to say Ron DeSantis, is there any scenario in which Trump is not the nominee for the
Of
Republicans?
course, of course, because I mean we still have months to go. But DeSantis has not inspired. He has certainly not picked up. In fact, he's lost a lot of his major donors, which are critically important here. You
Yeah.
saw that Ken Griffin moved away from him after being the Citadel founder and owner.
Yeah.
After being very positive in the early days, I've seen that with a number of the big hedge fund guys, big finance guys. I just don't see it happening. But the reason I started by talking about those that are running with Trump as opposed to against him is because the most plausible way for Trump to be defeated in the nomination is if a whole bunch of the second tier candidates fall away. And fall away because they want to be nominee and they know they don't have a shot. So they decide, okay, I'm going to give it up and put my support behind someone that can actually get it. Well, but that's not why many of them are running. They're actually
Mhm.
running for Trump. And I think, with that as the case, it's much more likely that Trump gets the nomination.
So then, if we are talking about, I want to stay with the foreign policy at the moment. So we've seen the we've seen the Trump administration 1.0. Do you see any evidence that a 2.0 administration, the world has changed? Would any of those policies be different? With regard to views of Putin, for example, China, North Korea? President Trump was, I believe, the only U.S. leader to actually meet with a North Korean supreme leader. I mean, what in that scenario? How should we be thinking about foreign policy? What are you saying to the many foreign leaders who probably come to you and say, "Ian, what's going on?"
Well, they're mostly very concerned because they all do now recognize that there is a world where Trump comes back as president. And 6 months ago, that wasn't the case. They should have been thinking that, but they weren't. Now they are. I would say that the Europeans are most concerned about that. And it's not because Trump's policies are going to change or be the same. It's because, as you say, the world has changed. There wasn't a war going on. In fact, there were really no major international crises under Trump's presidency, quite surprisingly, but there really weren't. I mean, there was this, Iran fracas where Trump decided to assassinate Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Defense Forces, and the Iranians backed down. If they hadn't backed down, that could have been quite a big deal, but they did, and that was a tidy little win for Trump. Here, you have a Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Trump has actively and repeatedly campaigned on the notion that if he is president, he will end the war in the first 24 hours. Now, how is he going to do that? Well, he's going to tell the Ukrainians, if you're not prepared to stop fighting, I am going to stop all support for you. And he doesn't like Zelensky. And this is a serious problem for the Europeans, serious problem for the Ukrainians, too.
Yeah, which is a stance that Nikki Haley does not share. Obviously, I mean,
Correct.
She in the last debate gave a very, I think, powerful argument for why the U.S. has to be engaged and the importance of Ukraine. So do you think Trump cares enough? Is that one of the key promises to his base, that he would have to withdraw and withdraw pretty quickly if he got in? Too
Trump
far away?
Trump doesn't care that much about policy. I think the thing that will most ignite a second Trump administration, if it comes to pass, is his desire to mete out justice against his personal enemies. And that means taking on the DOJ, taking on the FBI, ending his own legal jeopardy, going after Biden and Hunter, going after the Democrats, the media institutions, others that have been persecuting him wrongfully in his view. As to whether or not he would actually end all aid for Ukraine, I think the reality is something in the middle. But the Ukrainians would fear the day he was elected that this was going to happen. And that very reality would change things. The fact that Putin would feel like he won would change things. The Europeans would act differently. The Americans may well act differently in the run-up to. So I'll tell you one thing that has happened. Last week I was there in New York at the UN General Assembly. I was meeting with a lot of heads of state. I was not wearing this shirt when I was doing so.
It would play well some places.
Yeah, I could see Bhutan, Indonesia, Burkina Faso, but not the Europeans, right? And specifically with the European leaders, I was getting enormous concern that the window for support for Ukraine is closing. And if that's true, and there's no more support for a second counteroffensive, and the Ukrainians can't realistically take more territory, then what can we do to ensure that if Trump wins, things are stable? And the answer is bring Ukraine into NATO now, but before the election when it's too late. And there's no question the UK supports that, the French support that, the Baltics, the Nordics, the Poles. The Germans do not. The Americans.
The Biden administration. Why would the Biden administration support getting the Ukraine into NATO now? I mean, obviously they're planning on or hoping for a victory, so it wouldn't be based on the possibility or probability of a Trump victory. What would motivate them to want that?
Well, if the money is hard, so right now they're not motivated for it. They're still opposed to it. In part because they think it's too provocative against the Russians, in part because they don't fully trust the Ukrainians in that measure, that you'd have to defend them no matter what the Ukrainians do, or you undermine NATO, and then the Ukrainians have a lot more leverage over you, right? I mean, they can take bigger risks, and the Americans don't necessarily want that. So there are no easy answers here. I accept that, but the Russia concern has been allayed somewhat by the fact that the Russians have shown that they bluster a lot and they don't take a lot of action. I mean, they said there were going to be military consequences, political consequences when Finland joined. There haven't been any. They said there would be all these consequences if the Americans sent F-16s, sent Patriot missile systems. There haven't been. We now see attacks routinely on Crimea, drone attacks routinely inside Russia. Russians haven't really shown they can do very much else. So, and of course, Nord Stream was blown up, and it's unlikely that the Russians did that to themselves, but they haven't taken action against other pipelines or against, fiber, submarine cables. So I would say that the view in the Biden administration is increasingly one of this is not as much of a risk of World War III as we thought it might be, number one. And number two, I don't care what you're saying publicly, you're Biden, you're in it to win it. These are sensible people that understand that the election might not go their way.
Since we're talking about views of a possible Trump administration, you were speaking to leaders at the UN and elsewhere. What is the view of the Biden administration? Because, a lot of the focus here, besides Hunter Biden, has been on, is he okay? Is he going to have more of those Mitch McConnell-like moments? And is that a concern that you're seeing from global leaders as to whether Biden is fit to have a second term in office?
Yeah, most leaders think he's too old to run again, just like most Americans do. Most leaders are really shocked that Trump and Biden redux is what the Americans are going to do. Almost every leader I met with had some version of, so people around Biden, are there any plans? Like, who are they thinking of? Who should I meet in case it doesn't work out for him? I'm like, guys,
are there any plans?
There's no plan B. There's no plan B. Like, it's Biden, because you got to understand that if it's not Biden, Kamala wants it, and Biden is not like setting her side, and Biden's running. Now, it's certainly true that Biden's popularity has taken a hit because of his age, and it's becoming a more salient issue in part because of McConnell. I absolutely believe that McConnell now having two of these incidents, decision not to step down. It's the best thing he can do for the Republicans is keep in his position, clearly incapable.
Reminding us of the frailty of life. Is that what he's doing?
Reminding us of the frailty of the president. Of course, absolutely. If you're McConnell, you might fake a couple. Just to kid. I kid. I don't believe he's actually doing that. But the point is, this has become a more relevant issue, and foreign leaders are concerned about it. I want to be clear. Foreign leaders are not concerned about it because in their meetings with Biden, they think he can't handle it. These are people that all meet with Biden, and Biden in private bilats is fine. Sometimes he repeats himself. He stutters. We know that. He's frail. He slows down. His coherence is fine. He actually is, unlike Trump, who had no policy interest in many cases at all, and didn't know the substance of issues, right? Frequently. But Biden actually, especially on foreign policy, which is what I concern myself with, Biden has a lot of expertise on foreign policy, and on many issues, he's making the decisions.
Yeah,
that's still true.
It's been intriguing since we're on the let's take just you mentioned what happened. Obviously, one of the big themes of the UN General Assembly was sustainability, reaching those goals. We've seen these tragedies in places like Libya and Morocco, which are complicated for the U.S. Yet this, I think, big rush of U.S. aid. It's a tool of influence as well as being a tool for good. Do you see that, shifting at all, whether it's, a Biden or a Trump administration, USAID and our way of interacting with the rest of the world? How much has that come down to geopolitics, just out of curiosity, and how much of it's just, routinized, where there's a disaster, we will step forward to help? Because China's now looking at that as a powerful tool as well for building influence.
Well, they were. The Chinese are doing less of it because their economy is underperforming so dramatically. The Chinese do commercial diplomacy and industrial diplomacy much more effectively and at scale than the Americans. And when you look at the developing world, particularly the poorest countries in the world, the willingness of the Chinese to put serious money on the table, not link it to potentially unpopular political and economic liberalization, and instead link it to what can we do that you, leader, would like. And that can be corrupt or it can be open and above board. And either way is fine by us. We just want to get this done. And by the way, you're voting with us, not with Taiwan. Here's what you're doing with us militarily. All this stuff, right? That works. And that works at scale better than what the Americans do. So when you talk to sub-Saharan African leaders, when you talk to South American leaders, you talk to Southeast Asian leaders, particularly the poorest on the planet, they see China as doing a lot more. Now, China's doing less than it used to, and the Americans at the G20 summit have made some announcements about this new, sort of transport corridor that's going to go from India through the Middle East up to Europe. Yeah, and it, it matters at the margins, but the Americans still have nothing to compete with Belt and Road. And the United States is not a state capitalist system. In other words, most of the investment that comes from the U.S. is made by private corporations that are not necessarily patriotic. And so in that regard, it doesn't really matter what the U.S. government is doing with a lot of these countries. So, I mean, Microsoft and the Gates Foundation have wonderful relations with a whole bunch of individual countries that do not redound to the benefit of the U.S. government. And
so the aid
I'm not. 20 companies, yeah.
But let me close the loop. I agree with you. I think the foreign direct investment, China's been very powerful at expanding its sphere of influence. In terms of the aid, that's not something that you think really is going to be impacted, whether it's Trump or Biden or anybody else in the White House, just because the needs seem to be yawning and growing. You would just say that that's something that should not be on our radar right now as open to debate.
Look, of course it's open to debate in the sense that Trump, ideologically is an America firster, is more of a unilateralist, even rhetorically. Many leaders are unilateralists in action. And his willingness to say, if you don't do what I want, I will cut you, whether it is, an African country, South Korea, in terms of their troops and diplomacy, a Saudi, military deal, buy a bunch of American stuff, or even Mexico and defending the southern Mexican border, which worked, but was, pretty ham-fisted.
Yeah.
I would say that, Trump is more willing to use aid in overtly transactional and threatening ways. Frequently, that will work out for the Americans in the short term. It does not buy a lot of trust, but sometimes it'll work out badly. And so it's not like suddenly there's just a whole scale change in the way we think about aid.
Well, let me get on to two big players I feel I'd be remiss not to talk about, actually three topics. But the first is China. You mentioned there's been a lot of attention on the Chinese defense minister, somewhat missing in action and just of what's happening with Xi Jinping. I mean, what do you make of this? How important is it in terms of what's happening and understanding the mindset of Beijing right now?
Well, there were already a couple of the heads of the missile forces that were removed for corruption. And so, remember when Xi Jinping first became president, his first major action was anti-corruption in the military. And this shows that this continues to be a challenge for the Chinese Communist Party and for Xi Jinping personally. So I think he takes a little bit of a prestige hit. The fact that he's still dealing with this at such a high level, and in the case of the defense minister, someone that was just put into place, we'll probably never find out exactly what it was. And officially, it's still a health issue. That's what they're saying.
Li Shangfu, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it will become a health issue at some point soon, right? If it hasn't already.
Exactly.
I don't think that's causal. But this does not make me think differently about the political stability of China or the loyalty of the defense forces. It does show that the Chinese military readiness is open to question. And, I never thought that there was a near-term risk of a strike on Taiwan, but if you did, you should be reducing that assessment after the last few weeks. Yeah.
And being Canadian, the issue with Narendra Modi, I know Justin Trudeau has been basically accusing India of, in essence, assassinating a Canadian national on Canadian soil. I mean, that issue, I guess, is playing out, but it also makes me wonder, are we engaging with India in the right way? Because I think that's not been a country that's been on the radar as, a country to worry about.
No, in fact, it's been one of the more successful stories of the Biden administration. Also, Canada itself, which has a worse relationship with China than the U.S., unveiled to great fanfare, Canadian fanfare, so it was understated, an Indo-Pacific strategy a year ago, and there ain't no Indo right now, right? So this is a big problem for them. Now, yes, Canadian citizen, Sikh, radical, calling for secession in India of the Sikh homeland, deeply unpopular in India, and believed by the Indian government to be a terrorist.
Yeah.
Now, that evidence has not been made public. Those links have not been tested. Obviously, he is was not seen as a terrorist by the Canadian government, or he would have been arrested. So if you're Canada and the intelligence comes from the U.S. and is shared with the Five Eyes, so UK, Australia, New Zealand as well, and I don't have access to the intelligence because I don't have those clearances, but I have spoken with those leaders, and they have told me that this evidence is rock solid, recorded evidence of Indian agents talking about this.
Does it change the relationship, or is it just simply something we have to get through because India is too important a player?
It changes the Canada relationship. The United States, look, the Canadians really wanted to handle this on the down low. They didn't. It wasn't Trudeau that brought it up. It was the National Security Advisor.
Right.
They call it the National Security Intelligence Advisor, who was sent a couple months ago, and she tried to find an off ramp. What she wanted, she didn't want Modi to say, "I did this." She wanted Modi to say, "I'll investigate it. We'll figure out who was responsible for it. We'll throw someone under the bus,
and the consequences
and then it won't happen again." No.
So
that ain't happening. So
we just,
good.
We have about a minute left, Ian, and I want to, by the way, there's so much. Your article on the AI power paradox, I recommend everybody read it in Foreign Affairs. So I think that's a conversation perhaps for another day. But what else is on your radar? AI probably being one of them that you would put on ours right now as we try to make sense of this chaos around us.
Governing AI is massive, and the countries and the companies that are going to make the rules for the most transformative technology of our lifetimes, responding to climate change, particularly the growing conflict with the global south, the countries that are poor and having the hardest time on the back of that, and what happens over the next year and a half in the Russia-Ukraine war. Those are probably the three things that are front of mind that we haven't spent as much time on.
Great. Well, I look forward to more conversations, and as always, thank you very much, Ian, and hope to connect again soon.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.